The story's protagonist was a boy named Wade, who fled from his reckless father in the slums and enrolled in an adventurer system, which was designed to help the poor by training them for free and granting them magical abilities in the process. As a beginner, he was forced to participate in intense training, but he worked hard to become the top student of the class, so on the day when everyone would get their blessings from the priest, Wade was confident, unlike the others. An idiot named Frayne came to mess around, but he told him off, and they got in line to receive their gifts. Frayne was blessed with fire magic and was thrilled, but there were also those blessed with strong elements of magic, such as water magic for healing, earth magic with strong defense, and wind magic known for high mobility. Anything within this range of elements was considered a lucky pick, and any gift outside of them was useless. Unfortunately for Wade, he was blessed with a form of magic known as slowpoke magic, which essentially slowed down the movements of its user. He initially had some faith in it and tried using it, but he became so heavy that he almost buried himself alive. When he was drawn out of the ground, he became a laughingstock and passed out due to trauma. But suddenly, he was reincarnated into a more advanced world where he gained insight into futuristic knowledge and woke up in his original world. As memories of his past life came flooding back, he realized that what he had was gravity magic, which worked following the laws of gravity. As he figured it out, his magic leveled up and he was confident he would instantly have cheats. However, he flunked his trial and decided that perhaps his current world didn't even have the concept of gravity, and broke guys like him had no access to basic education. Later, Frayne gloated again and told him to give up on being an adventurer, but Wade ignored him. Frayne then challenged Wade to a fight on the day of their mock test, and Wade accepted his challenge. He tried to figure out how to use his weight-enhancing slow magic. So while he was training, he cast the spell on himself and realized he was running faster and was generally more efficient during practice, thanks to his gravitational manipulation. On the other hand, Frayne was practicing and had just thrown a destructive fireball, making Wade consider the fact that all his muscle training may not prepare him adequately for Fred's deadly flames. These efforts paid off that same day when he bumped into some cocky wind magic punk, chanted his weight spell, and the guy collapsed into the ground, creating a crater where he fell. The day of the mock test finally arrived, and everyone expected Frayne to win because of how useless Wade's magic was. The referee commenced the battle, and Wade initially started running around so fast that it made it difficult for Frayne to keep up and direct his fire adequately. Eventually, one fireball landed and almost destroyed his shield, but Wade knew he couldn't survive another hit, so he increased his speed, activated his slowpoke magic, and increased the weight of his sword to land a finishing blow to Frayne. Instantly, he was declared the winner, and no one could believe that with such slow magic, Wade could still defeat a fire mage. Meanwhile, Frayne went on whining like a baby goat and attempted a sneak attack on him, but Wade threw back his fireball at him, setting him ablaze. As Wade left the scene triumphantly, a cute girl named Ice fell in love with him instantly. For the next phase of their training, the adventurers were set to explore the shallow levels of the dungeons and form two parties of at least 2 members. The instructor told Wade that he obviously had communication issues, as observed during his fight with Frayne, so he should team up with someone he could get along with. Wade realized that some memories of his past still plagued him, such as when he was a corporate junkie with no friends. He tried teaming up with some people, but it seemed they were terrified of him after seeing what he did to Frayne. He knew this would affect his graduation credit and send him back to the slums, so Wade had to figure out a way to team up. From a distance, he saw Ice arguing with a pro-level water mage named Drop, who declared that Ice was useless without her. Drop called Ice all sorts of derogatory names, so Wade stepped in. However, Drop called him a poverty-stricken dog from the streets of Broke, with low-level magic that compared to hers, given that she was of a noble background. Anyway, she told him to get lost while Ice timidly invited him to team up with her, but Drop burst out laughing and said only water mages would ever want to team up with Ice. To her disappointment, though, Wade accepted Ice's invitation and walked away with her. A few days later, the adventurers were instructed to remain on the first floor, defeat 3 monsters, and return to base immediately. Dumb Drop told the instructor that the rules were too strict, because they already had decent experience with monster battle training. But the man warned them that dungeons weren't like the natural forests they knew and were designed to consume the lives of adventurers. The instructor also added that the condition for them to graduate would be to reach the 5th floor of the dungeon, and that would earn them a bronze-level adventurer's badge at graduation, marking them as certified adventurers. Later, Drop insulted Wade and Ice, calling them half-baked and directionless, mocking Wade for being uneducated, and said they would both die like stray dogs in the dungeon. Either way, they entered the dungeon and Wade lit a torch, illuminating the tons of treasures present in the dungeon. But he didn't care for these things because he knew they were traps that could lead to the end of his life, even though he could cash out from them. Instantly, he sensed something and threw the torch, after which a horde of goblins attacked them. Wade activated his gravity magic and increased the weight of his sword, making it easy for him to swiftly slice the goblins, one after the other. He had just split one goblin into two when he noted another incoming from the top, but a few seconds before the goblin could strike, Ice instantly froze it, and luckily did so at the right time. She thought of herself as a mere rookie, but he told her that her Ike magic was pretty solid. However, she demonstrated what she meant by asking him to pour water onto a scarecrow, which she then froze, to prove that her magic was only useful in the presence of water. Wade asked her to show him what the magic looked like without water, and when she tried to activate her powers, they couldn't freeze the next scarecrow. She got sad and started sobbing because she only knew one spell and couldn't even master that one. But Wade told her not to apologize because he was in no position to judge her magic. In fact, his own was worse off compared to hers, which was more practical, so he urged her to believe in herself and find ways to make it work. He suggested she try directly placing her hand on the target, and just like that, the scarecrow was frozen solid, almost broken. Now that he'd proved her magic was the real deal, they returned to the dungeon, and he thanked her for saving him from the goblin who almost snuck in on him. Back in the dungeon, he found some strange markings on the swords belonging to the goblins and realized that their swords were covered in deadly poison. In other words, this showed the floors ahead would be even harder to conquer. On the other hand, Drop's party was in the dungeon, but Drop was distracted by her thoughts, thinking about how she had always been kind to Ice since childhood and even saved her a spot in her party, only for Ice to choose Wade over her. To Drop, Wade was nothing but some slum rat who managed to pull off one flashy magic trick, but he still remained a slowpoke magician, so that meant it would be nearly impossible for him and Ice to survive the dungeon. Just then, Drop's teammates called out to her, and she told them not to distract her but turned to find out that right behind her was a scary grandpa with more teeth than active brain cells. On the other side of the dungeon, Wade demonstrated how he had mastered his skill so much that slaying the goblins had become second nature, thanks to a new spell he had learned recently. It was activated by a weight-down command and worked by reducing weight as opposed to increasing it. When he had practiced it in the arena, it made him so light that he defied gravity and gave him an experience similar to walking on the moon, which he modified to make himself levitate. Just as he was telling Ice more about his skill, he heard a loud scream coming from deep within the dungeon. They rushed to help the victim and found a manticore half-chewing an adventurer to death. So Wade moved to distract it so that Ice would get behind the beast and freeze it. Luck elevated himself and landed his heavy sword on the manticore, releasing an adventurer from its mouth, who bled heavily and thought she was going to die. Drop told her to be strong and sit up, because she wasn't going to die, and proceeded to heal her with her magic. Wade asked the adventurers for backup to fight the manticore, but Ice quickly placed her hands directly on it and froze its tail, causing it to yell out in pain for help. Hearing the manticore scream for help in the human language was rather surprising, so Wade assumed it was just mimicry, but then the manticore repeated itself. However, Wade didn't fall for its gimmicks and pushed his blade into the manticore's chest, with his gravity magic in play. This failed woefully and he fell backwards, realizing that his magic had failed because he'd been pushed to his limits. In any case, even though he'd landed a fatal wound on the manticore, he knew it wasn't over because it would keep moving until he'd knocked it out. The manticore moved spontaneously, so Wade told the other to step back and approach the manticore with his bare fists, since his weapon was stuck in the beast's chest. He told the dude beside him to get ready to hold the manticore back while Wade himself would create the first opening. So he drew the beast's attention and jumped to the roof, while the other dude landed his hammer on the beast's head. However, that barely affected it, and it even choked on the fat hammer. Within that time, Wade descended from above with his fists clasped as his weapon. As he landed his fists on the beast, he mightily increased his weight on his hands and instantly dropped it to the floor, and then Ice placed her hands on the beast to freeze it until it was completely covered. There were still crackant sounds in the ice, and Wade had to act quickly. So he took the guy's hammer and smashed his frozen manticore into pieces and told everyone to get out of the dungeon. When they returned, the instructor said their training for the day had been canceled, and then said he was impressed that Wade and the other dude managed to defeat the manticore despite being newbies. As the guys headed back, Wade asked the guy for his name, and the dude was surprised that Wade couldn't remember him, although he knew Wade. Wade said it was nothing deep, and he was just allergic to dweebs. The guy introduced himself as Clay, an earth magician, and then they recalled the fight with the manticore, who would have completely gotten rid of a party made of only 2 individuals, bringing into question why they allowed teams of 2 in the first place. It all boiled down to reducing the number of deaths in the dungeon generally, and even though 2 heads would be better than 1, adding more members to a party wouldn't eliminate the possibility of death. Since he now knew how dangerous the dungeon could be, Clay said he'd get standard leather armor for his survival, especially after seeing his party member get torn apart by the manticore. 3 of them scheduled a shopping trip for their next meeting, and Clay was glad to hang out with Wade because he regarded him as a hero after watching him defeat the manticore with his bare hands. However, Wade said it was a team effort, and both Clay and Ice had held the fort in their own way. Just then, the godmother of Pickmess interrupted their conversation and said that Ice was useless during the operation. Wade defended her, saying it was Ice who helped freeze the manticore when they had insufficient firepower for the final blow. He also mentioned that Drop was careless enough to go healing someone without caring that she could have been attacked, so she broke down crying, saying she felt bad because she wasn't useful and that she truly came to thank them. Wade felt bad for making her cry, but acknowledged that she at least cared to help heal someone in that moment. Wade understood why they were in panic when they felt they'd die, because he was somewhat mature, thanks to his memories of a past life. Anyway, he told Drop to avoid mocking others and told her to be on her way. But before they went their separate ways, both Drop and Ice looked at him with eyes inviting him for some action. Drop later asked Ice whether Wade had a crush on any girl, but Ice was flustered and said Wade won't be comfortable around an old hag like her. Drop was angry and asked whether it was Wade himself who said that, or Ice was just saying it on his behalf. But the flustered face gave Ice away, and Drop realized the girl just wanted to hog Wade all to herself. The moment she saw Ice smiling at her when Drop asked whether she liked Wade, Drop got crazy and slammed her body into the wall. Drop forgot she had a hideous face and went on to insult Ice, saying she was a clumsy, half-baked mage whom Wade would never fall in love with. She also told Ice that she was just jealous that she wouldn't stand a chance against Drop, hence why she was trying to sabotage her love life. She slapped Ice, and the poor girl broke down crying while she said no one would save her, not even Wade. She slowly approached her and threatened her, saying she had to cooperate with her henceforth and all that. Ice looked with scared eyes, but this only gained her another slap from that evil witch, who said from that day, Ice would help to make her love life become a reality and make sure she did exactly what Drop requested of her to ensure that everything worked out just fine with Wade. From a young age, Drop had always been a pain in Ice's neck. She'd sometimes burn her books, make her quit her hobbies, drive everyone away from her, mock her, and make her feel she was the reason everything bad ever happened. One day, Ice told her guardians to send her far away to any country, so long as she wouldn't find Drop there. She wanted to become an adventurer, so when her dad supported her dreams, she was beyond excited to leave, because as long as Drop wasn't present in her life, I knew she could accomplish anything. However, she later bumped into Drop at the Adventurer Academy, and all the misery in Ice's life was multiplied. Drop would only give Ice the bad meals, the worst side of the room, and her bad attitude. The Donzo even felt she would have been the top student if Wade wasn't there, and all she did was hate him. One day, Drop said she'd created a party and Ice would be the last member of the party, who'd be Drop's handmaiden. But Ice was fed up with taking instructions from Drop, and the moment Wade agreed to team up with her, she felt relieved. There was something about him she instantly liked, right from how he spoke to her with kindness to how he beat a fire mage against all odds, which made her realize that being a mage wasn't true strength, but rather the strength of her character was. All thanks to Wade, Ice started believing in herself and was set free from Drop, so she owed him her gratitude and some backshots in return. Now that ugly fool was asking her to hand Wade over to her, and even saying Wade wasn't some great guy but just someone to ease her boredom and satisfy her needs, Ice was mad angry for the first time ever. She activated her skill, Ice Blow, and pushed that pig, gluing her to the ground with ice. Drop couldn't believe what she was seeing at all, so Ice said it was all thanks to Wade she'd been able to try out different ways to use her ice magic, and if she wanted, she could glue Drop's shoulder to the ground just as easily. Drop was begging for mercy, but Ice went on to do it anyway. The fool still thought Ice was joking until she saw the hint of cold rage in Ice's eyes, and it reminded her of everything bad she ever did to her, including trying to make her a slave forever and, finally, trying to steal Wade from her. Just then, Drop started screaming to draw attention, but Ice placed her finger over her lips and shut her up. Ice went on to say that Wade was an amazing guy and she was glad to have met him, because even with his horrible magic, he never gave up and became the strongest of them all. She believed that if Drop stayed around him, she'd damage his progress, so Ice asked her to promise to stay as far as possible from Wade, or she'd do something regrettable. Drop made her promise and asked Ice to let her go because she was freezing, but Ice knew she was lying about staying away from Wade because Drop had a tell sign whenever she was about to lie. This angered Ice, who almost froze Drop to death when the girl started crying and screaming her promise to stay away from Wade. Still, this only made Ice a little more devilish, and she realized that if she froze Drop and shattered her into pieces, no one would ever find out what happened. She gradually started to freeze from the bottom up, and the Drop was scared to death, begging for her life and reaffirming her promise, saying she didn't want to die. Ice then told Drop to show her proof that she'd stay away from Wade forever. So Drop immediately said she'd let go of everything, including the Adventure Academy, and that she was way too scared of Ice's threats to continue. This earned her her freedom from Ice, who told her to get out of the school immediately. Ice couldn't believe this newfound audacity she'd gotten, but knew it was all thanks to Wade. The next day, Wade, Ice, and Clay went to the market, and Wade submitted the poisoned goblin knife he got from the dungeon. It was appraised as a rare item, and the lady purchased it at a good price. They went separate ways to pick up their individual weapons, and when he was on his own, Wade pondered upon how it had been 2 days since Drop left the training school and her party fell apart, resulting in Clay joining Wade's party. Later, Ice showed up and asked him whether they could choose their weapons together, so he agreed and said they would choose hers first. He said Ice would be best served with a weapon that could channel magic, and she said she didn't mind it being long and fat. The weapon would absorb her Ice Blow spell and have the same effect as applying the Ice Blow directly by touch, perhaps a foil or rapier, since the purpose was to deliver cold air to the enemy, and slashing wasn't that important. The problem was that foil was only used by nobles, and ordinary metals were too brittle for exploration. They eventually settled on 2 swords for Ice, and Wade decided he'd get the left-hand weapon, and Ice suggested a mace. They reunited with Clay, who suggested helping Wade choose another weapon, but Ice meekly said she wanted to help Wade too. Wade agreed but said he wanted a heavy weapon, so they found a giant sword which had been left unsold for years because no one was worthy enough. However, seeing that Wade could easily lift the weapon, she decided to let him have it for free. He was thrilled and activated his spell on the web, wielding it easily and impressively in front of everyone, and lifting his sword with only one hand. Later, Wade and Ice got into a lover's quarrel, which totally bored Clay, so he told them to wrap it up so he could go get laid. Ice was already flustered by the whole event, and it only got worse when Wade playfully asked her out on a date. They returned to the dungeons with their torch, but soon encountered some wild wolves, which attacked only Wade, thinking he was alone, but while he was chopping them up, Ice was freezing them up, while Clay smashed their frozen bodies with his hammer. The team effort was so efficient that they were proud of themselves and decided to maintain their formation. Soon, Wade said he was tired, but Clay said something about staying a little longer because when they eventually attained silver rank, it would be expected of them. Wade wondered why Clay wanted to stay back, and he said he was from a Viscount's family, but they shouldn't feel intimidated because of his noble background. However, Wade couldn't get over how lucky the guy was and the difference in their social standing. He said he only knew one noble, which was the official who gave them magic lessons, but Clay said that official was from an earl's family, which was much higher than a Viscount's family. He also said the earl was second in command after the royals, while Viscounts were the lowest of the nobles and were only a step ahead of the worst of knights. Either way, to Wade, a noble was a noble, so he addressed Clay as their team leader, but the guy humbly turned it down, saying he wanted to stand by Wade for a lifetime. As they returned to the surface, Wade thought to himself about what kind of adventurer he wanted to be, because there were 3 paths for adventurers. The first path was that of a swordsman who essentially slayed bad guys to protect the village. Then there was the hunter, who hunted down demons and gathered herbs. The third was the adventurer of 3 torches or a dungeon explorer, who did not need to shed blood or hunt monsters but rather gather treasures. His thoughts were interrupted by Ice, who reminded him to eat, and then he asked her what sort of adventurer he should become and whether he had to stick with one in the first place. All Ice had to say was that she was following him wherever he went and whatever he decided, but he asked whether she had a purpose when she left home for the Adventurer Academy. However, she only told him she left home with no goal other than to escape certain personal things she was dealing with. He understood her, though, because he also ran away from certain bad conditions at home, but that didn't take away his worry about the future. In his past life, he was a die-hard hustler who'd do anything for the bag, but his corporate job eventually became the end of him because his body hadn't gotten any rest. He asked Clay what he'd do after graduating from the academy, and all he said was he wanted to be a hero, particularly a torch adventurer. He asked Wade to join him on his oath, but Ice got jealous and told him not to drag Wade into his bleak, futureless life. Anyway, days passed quickly, and all 3 of them went on to achieve so much during their time together, including arriving at the 5th floor. Eventually, it was only a day to their final exam, which qualified them to graduate, and saying their goodbyes was hard. Wade had still not decided what adventurer path he'd embark on, because he enjoyed all paths he'd ventured on, so he heeded his friend's advice, telling him to do it all instead. For the time being, he only wanted to clear the dungeon's 5th floor, so they both cheered him on and went their separate ways. Wade later went for training and was joined by Ice, who offered to help him wrap up his packing in his room, but he told her he was preserving his V-card for his mum's friend. He placed his hand on her head. Ice almost exploded on the spot and pledged her undying loyalty to him. He asked Ice about her preferred adventurous path, but she said it was a secret, and she would only tell him after the graduation exam if all went well. She told him not to rush his decision because he would soon figure himself out, and then they decided to get some sleep ahead of the adventurer exam the next day. The exam finally arrived, and Wade, Ice, and Clay went on their final adventure together, intending to conquer the 5th floor of the dungeon. He gave them some safety warnings, and they sprung into action as they were approached by demons and wild wolves. Even though they were still on the 4th floor, Wade decided to take things a bit more seriously, since it was their final exam, so he defied gravity, increased his weight, and landed a double impact uppercut to the beasts, rounding the last one up with a final compact blow. When they'd cleared it, he deliberated with his teammates about whether they should clear some levels above the 5th, and since they left it up to him, he said they'd head right back home after reaching the 5th floor, because it would be more beneficial to conquer those as guild quests that they'd get paid for. Things got more serious as they headed down to the 5th floor, because they soon jammed Frayne's party on the way, with Frayne almost fainting as he assumed that Wade was after his life. One of his followers tried to incite him against Wade, but he shut the idiot up and apologized to Wade for all the bullying. Wade advised him not to venture beyond the 5th floor because there wasn't much gain in doing that, but Frayne assumed that Wade was just being a wimp, so he went on to do whatever he felt like doing, Wade and the others hadn't even gone far when they heard a loud scream from Frane's team below, so he ignored his own rules to help them out if there was trouble. Upon his arrival, he found a chimera with half of an adventurer in its mouth, but Frane was angry that Wade came to help, because it meant he could also join them in dying. They moved to rescue the adventurer, and Frane fired a fiery arrow at first, but the chimera dodged it, so he asked Wade to do his thing. Quickly, Wade fetched his brand new sword, and then it was time for some action. It was time for him to put his giant sword to the test, so he waited for the chimera to charge towards him. Then he activated his gravity spell and drove his sword right into the belly of the chimera. The beast survived because the cut was too shallow, so he told the adventurers to back him up so he'd strike the chimera at once. However, the goat head of the chimera started chanting a magic spell, and Wade knew he had to stop it before it activated, so he told Frane to aim for the goat head. Frane fired an arrow at it, while Wade aimed for the lion head together with his teammates. However, while at it, Ice tried activating her spell but got bitten by the serpent's head, even though she successfully drove her sword through its head. She was backed up by Clay, who smashed the serpent's skull, and Wade, who later joined them to ask whether she was okay. However, she'd been poisoned by the snake's bite and was talking gibberish, so they had to get her an antidote first. Wade left Ice in Clay's care so he'd finish what he'd started, and Ice handed him her sword to support him. He returned to the chimera and planned a joint attack with Frane, and then waited for the beast to make the first move. From his past life, he remembered watching documentaries that showed how good animals were at picking moving targets better than stationary targets. So as the chimera punched, he remained still and at the last second, jumped to stab it, but the chimera surprisingly curved around him and behind him, slamming its claws through him. As he fell back, Frane called out to him, but there was no response, and no one could believe that Wade was down. Frane asked him to wake up while he bought some time with the chimera, and then picked Wade up. However, Wade spontaneously started laughing like a spider had crawled into his brain, because he'd finally found his true passion. He realized that very day he showed up at the dungeon, and every thrill that was experienced in the process fed his passion for danger and near death. He grabbed a weapon as he finally accepted that his favorite thing in the world was a death match. Currently, his body won't fight as well as before he got hit by the chair, so he had to think of a different style that suited his condition. As Wade went about his monk realizations, Frane sadly shook his head on behalf of the Brotherhood, because they'd lost a sane brother. Wade went full crazy and decided not to wait on the chimera this time around, so he charged upwards and made his body lighter in the air, somehow winding upside down. He threw his sword at the confused chimera, but that was dodged and the weapon was stuck in the ground. Before the chimera could figure out Wade's plan, Wade was already on the floor behind it and running at full speed. He called Frane to back him up with a fire arrow to the goat's head, during which Wade jumped and chopped its head off. Now that it was only the lion left, Wade was going to face him squarely. So as the lion reached for him, Wade immediately flew to the roof, activated his anti-gravity spell, and descended with his sword on the lion's body. Right after that, as the lion was briefly distracted, he aimed for the lion's paw and chopped it off, enjoying the thrill of this newfound feeling while he did so. It was time for the lion to approach him one last time, so he dropped his sword in the ground and activated a new spell to make the weight of an object be massively increased, and instantly, the ground on which the lion lay began sinking into the ground. Still, that did not have the intended effect Wade had aimed for, so he threw his sword in the air and activated a spell, diverting it directly onto the lion's neck, chopping it off and earning him victory. He passed out but woke up to the sounds of his friends calling his name and seeing his body bandaged all over. It turned out that Wade and one other had passed out in the dungeon, but Ice was only recovering slowly, and the regular antidote she was given wasn't strong enough for the poison she was injected with. That fight ended with 1 fatality, 2 seriously wounded, and 3 lightly injured in the battle. Also, the chimera wasn't supposed to appear on the 5th floor, so something was odd. Wade got an earful from the instructor, but was told that there was no single bronze adventurer who could defeat a chimera, meaning his victory was a great one and similar to that of a veteran silver adventurer. The man also told him he was destined to become a hero, and that those around him won't be able to keep up with his growth, but advised him to take the adventurer's path, which led to freedom, since they took orders from no one and had no one to answer to if they didn't want to. With that, Wade was informed that he had successfully graduated from training and earned a bronze rank on all adventurer certificates. The instructor gave him a few more words of advice, and they all thanked him. Afterwards, Wade's teammates said they had been inspired by watching him and seeing how much he accomplished. They parted ways, and he said they should meet up at the Adventurers Guild. However, he bumped into Frayne, who handed him the fang of the chimera and admitted he had a crush on him after all. Meanwhile, Ice was worried, as she remembered that she had promised to tell Wade her after-school plans if their exam went well. However, all her plans to follow him went out the window because she realized that standing beside him made her an underachiever. After all, he was so powerful all by himself and didn't need her help. She decided she would keep getting stronger, although right now she wasn't strong at all and could barely fight. She broke down, crying, realizing that she had fallen deeply in love with him. But he would probably not want to stay with her because she wasn't strong enough to fight through the dangerous situations he would be putting himself in. After losing her mind, she realized that all she needed to do was become so strong to the point that she could support him and become his worthy rival. She played around with her magic and got a small snowman, which encouraged her and made her more aggressive about getting stronger. She dashed to meet him and, in front of everyone, confessed her feelings, but Wade was confused because no one had ever confessed to him. He didn't know just how obsessed and in love with him she'd become, and that she was even planning to be so strong that she could pass off as his worthy enemy. When Clay returned, Wade revealed a bag of cash they'd earned after selling their spoils from the dungeon, and said that the guild required one more person to register in their party if they were to take on full-time quests. Coincidentally, a new girl who'd just gotten into town had just seen their poster seeking a water mage and was interested in joining their party. Has Ice gained another competitor, and will she chase this one out like she did Drop? If you'd like to find out in part 2, type Isolicious in the comment section. If you enjoyed the video, give a thumbs up and subscribe for similar content. As always, thanks for watching and see you in the next video.